Thanks for inviting and giving me an opportunity to present in this Dataverse Summit. The topic that I'm going to present today is specifically around retrieving the data efficiently using the Dataverse connector. So when I review the flows, the cloud flows from my colleagues, and I always had a challenge. Saw a lot of people try not to optimize the query. I wouldn't blame them because some of them are just functional consultants or seasoned developers who are not really familiar with how to optimize the code and query. So I'm just sharing my knowledge to those who are not familiar with getting all these parameters from the list rules. Um, list rules action of the Dataverse, and I'll explain how we can use those parameters to retrieve the data efficiently. Okay, for those who don't know me, my name is Lin. I'm Microsoft Business Application MVP. I'm currently working as a technical architect at the Delta Insights, and as Ras mentioned, I'm based in Wellington, New Zealand. I the slide today, you can scan this QR codes to download. I just paste a link in the chat window, and by that way, you can see there in each slide there are accompanying links where you can learn more about the details. For example, there are tools where you can download these tools. So it will be more beneficial for you to download the slides after if you want to know more about specific information. Okay, I am my main focus is Dynamics 365. I started my career in MSCRM back in last 12, 13 years ago. And nowadays, I am more and more into Power Automate Cloud Flows and Power Apps Canvas apps to build more information, to build more, um, to enhance the Dynamics 365 or model-driven application systems that we're building in our team. When I'm not working, I just share the experience at my work with through my blog, linzalwin@blogspot.com, or through if you want to follow me, I'm on Twitter at linzalwin, just my full name. Or I do sometimes participate in the forums and answering questions, or I just do the speaking engagement at the conference like this, or in the user groups. Other than that, my personal hobbies are just playing games and watching anime. Today, agenda are just three main topic. The first one is just a quick one to what are the tools available to enhance to build your flows. That will really helpful. And another one is the main topic about all these parameters in the list flows and how you can make use of them. And then there will be a few of bonus tips towards the end. And we'll conclude it by the Q&A section. So this is the typical list flow action looks like. So what I'm going to cover today is starting from the select columns until towards the skip token. The rule count is self-explanatory, so I don't really have to explain. If you want to specify the number of rule counts, if you only want to query one, you can add one. I have never come across any scenario to use the partition ID. I believe I looked through online and I also couldn't find any one blogging or any documentation or of more detail about it. Um, I believe it might be related to the querying NoSQL tables means probably the audit table. But when I get more information, I'll probably share it in my blog post. So the first tool that I always use when building my flows is the Fetch XML Builder. So that's a tool that I can't really, um, without this tool, I can't really build flows as fast as I can right now. Especially in the Fetch XML Builder, there's a function called the view automate parameters. So what I do is I just build the Fetch XML, and I just copy the filter query and the expand query from the fetch XML builder and put it into my list flows action. So that is really helpful. You can download it at the fetchxmlbuilder.com. Uh, you can find more information at the fetchxmlbuilder.com, but that is part of the XIM toolbox tool, so you can just download it from the tool library there. For any reason, if your organization doesn't allow downloading or running of the exam toolbox exe in your work PC, what you can do is there is the the new tool released by Guido, which is called Dataverse REST Builder. That is the managed solution. So you can install the managed solution in your dev environment, and it comes with one model-driven app called Dataverse REST Builder. Just like similar to uh, how you build the Fetch XML Builder, you build the query, and at the last step, or automate step, you can get the all these parameters for your list rules action. And other than that, there's also another tool called View Fetch XML. This is helpful if you don't want to download all the fetch XML all the time in your advanced file. You can click on this button. It will just show the pop-up for a fetch XML of your query. And it also has the web API JS tab. So from there, you can also get the, the queries and for your parameters for your list rules action. So the first parameter that I want to talk about is the select columns. So in one of the blog posts by Sarah Lagerquist, she mentioned that the list rows action is not a buffet, so it's like a la carte menu. So you do not order the whole menu of food and then pick and choose what to eat. So that would be too expensive. So you decide beforehand what you order and make sure you consume it all. And what that means is if you keep the list rows action, and if you just keep it empty and do the list rows, the flow will retrieve all the columns for your for the table that you're retrieving. That means if you have like 50 columns in your table, it will retrieve all 50 columns. That will be impact your performance of your flow, especially if you are retrieving multiple rows of data. And it's also not only impacting the performance, but it also in the flow, the step below for under that select columns, the list rows, when you list down all the dynamic values, you will see that there are all of the columns of this table are available. That means you will have a lot of columns to scroll through. You can see there's a lot of columns to scroll through to find the column that you want, even though you can filter it using this search box. So by adding the column, for example, if I just wanted the full name for the contact when I do the list rules, and by doing so in the dynamic list below, it also the flow designer will only show the full name, together with um, other out of the box the parameters, and you don't see unnecessary columns in this dynamic values list. That will be really helpful to have your to have a clear view for the flow maker. And and when you do this fetch XML query, you don't really have to specify the select columns, because in the fetch XML you're already specifying what you need. But by specifying again in the select columns, what it means is it will also only show the relevant values in the dynamic value list for the step below. But it will not make any impact for the performance. Um, that's one thing to take note is select columns for a lookup will be a bit different. It is not not simple as the logical name of the column. It starts with an underscore, and it's ends with the underscore value, and there's a column name in between. So you can find out more about this, why it's happened for a specific lookup columns. Yeah, you can find out in the link below. But that is what you have to be careful with when you specify the select columns for the lookup columns. The best is just to use the fetch XML builder, and it will just give you the select columns, and even for a lookup, it would automatically um, prefix and suffix all these necessary for the lookup columns. So that's recommended even for select columns. Select columns can also be specified in a get a rows action too. Um, it wouldn't make much difference in the performance because it's just retrieving one row, but it still make a difference of how it shows the number of columns in the dynamic value list. Yes, there's a chat suggested Microsoft should show the drop-down list of columns to be selected in the select column options. Yes, I totally agree with that. That is currently how we have to type and enter the select column is really anti, really not citizen developer friendly, and I wish we have a UI like the SharePoint actions where we can just select from the list of columns. Since we know we already specified the table, the flow designer should be able to show the columns that we are going to retrieve anyway. This is important to filter the rows instead of retrieving all the columns, all the rows. You need to filter what are the action or rows that you want to process. But building the filter query can be a little bit tricky for the citizen developer, especially if you're not familiar with the standard query functions for web API. And it's worse when we have to use the Dataverse specific web API queries functions like contains or something like this. The last X days, last 7 days. I don't even remember on top of my head how to write these filter queries, so I always use the fetch XML builder to get all these filter queries. And so this is how you can get from the fetch XML builder. Just build the query in the fetch XML builder, and there's the view and Power Automate parameters, and that will be have a filter query. So once you click it, it will copy into the clipboard. You just paste it and replace all the dynamic values over there. So if you don't specify any select columns or filter, and the flow checker will give you a warning that the list rows does not have any parameter. So that's an indication that you need to optimize your flow, maybe retrieving 5,000 rows without for all the columns, so which is not really good in terms of the performance. And especially if you're looping through all these rows, that will be consume a lot of API calls, and yeah, which is not ideal. And talking about the saving the API calls, you can also save the API calls by using the expand query. Expand query is not only specific to list rows action, just like select column, it is also applicable for a get a row action too. Imagine the scenario where we have the TUID of the contact. We want to get the first name, last name, and we also want some account specific information from the related company of that contact, and also the email address of the primary contact of that company. So typically, if you use the get a row action, you will have to call it 3 times to get this value and get a primary company name and fill it in the another one to get a account specific information, and then again use this primary contact ID in another step to get the email address of the primary contact. So you can just squeeze all three actions into one action by using the expand query. Um, you don't really have to remember how to write the expand query. Just use the fetch XML builder, and it will give you the query value like this. Just don't forget to change the join value to the outer join if you are using the nested expand, just like this. Like nested expand means you're um, going for a 2-level up in your expand queries. Otherwise, the fetch XML builder will say that you cannot use the nested query for inner joins. So that's one tip that you will need to remember. So by doing so, it will save two API calls for your flow. And imagine if you are in the loop or for a list of contacts, it will save dozens of or even hundreds of API calls. So how paging can be achieved in the Power Automate if we fetch more than 5K records. That will be covered later in this presentation. So I will talk about it there are 2 different ways to use the skip token or paging in the fetch XML call. I will explain about it. CDS legacy connector, it is going to be deprecated, but Microsoft has yet to be announced when. I believe there are still a lot of some gaps in terms of with the the Dataverse legacy connector and the Dataverse connector. So we still don't have the when a row is selected trigger for a Dataverse connector, and there are some it's not available in the logic apps and stuff. So once Microsoft has covered those gaps, they will make it deprecated, but that will be probably like months away from now. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So when we use the expand query, the for a 1-level parent entity, the fields are available in the dynamic value list. What that means is, for example, if you're getting the contact and getting the some information from the created by, or some, for example, information from the modified by, and some information from prefer user, then all these values will be available in the dynamic values. So it will show with the lookup name plus the column name of the related entity, related table. So let's say it will be shown as the created by, and then the column name primary email, and then created by, and the last name. So that is how it's showing the one level parent table if we use the specify the expand query. It's easy for citizens developers to pick and choose. But there are some exceptions. Oh, so this is also what I mentioned just now. Just like how we use the filter query, you can use the expand query and generate the expand query using the fetch XML builder. You can just build a fetch XML, few Power Automate parameters. Ta-da, you can get it and just copy paste. I also don't write it, just type it out because there are a lot of things that can go wrong, like the relationship name and all this stuff. So the best is just to use the fetch XML builder. Um, but the expand query values, the values from the related table one level up, are not being visible for polymorphic lookups. So for example, there's in the contact, there's a column called the company name. Even though the column name, display name is a company name, um, the lookup is the polymorphic lookup where you can populate both account and contact. And that's the logical name is that parent customer ID. And when you specify that parent customer polymorphic lookup in your expand query, the flow designer is not able to show that value in the dynamic value list. So as you can see, it only shows the full name in the list, but it doesn't show all this information from the for a related company name in the dynamic value list. And not only the polymorphic lookup, if you're doing the nested expand, like if you're expand for more than one level up, or if you're expand query for a child records, it's not the flow designer is not able to show the values in the list of the dynamic values. So how do we do in that scenario? In that scenario, I'll show you how we can do it in the citizen developer friendly way. That way is use the burst JSON. So you just create a burst JSON action and select the value of the list rows action, the list rows outputs into this into the content, and then you can use the generate from sample to generate the schema, and you don't have to know it and how the schema works. So to generate the schema from the sample, you run the flow for very first time without further actions. Once you run it, and there will be a link to um, downloads, which will open the output JSON in another tab. I use by default the output JSON is just a big chunk of text. It's not really easy to read. You can use a lot of JSON formatter browser extension to make it look nice. I use the 7JSON viewer, which is in the link below. It's the link for Microsoft Edge add-ons, but you can also download it find it in the Chrome store too. So once you got it, you just copy the value of the JSON of and after the value property, because that's where you put the value, and paste it into that the dialog when you click on the generate from the sample JSON. So once you click it, it will just show the populate the schema by parsing that. And one thing that I would like to um, remind is when you try to run it and parse the JSON from the sample, make sure you are selecting the data where there's a proper data. Let's say if you are um, expanding for fields from the related fields from the related company name, and if the values that you're copying is doesn't have the lookup value to the company, and your sample JSON will not be um, accurate. It will just missing. It will miss the the lookup value and the related column. So you just need to make sure that the query that you're running is retrieving all the sample data with all the columns and all the required properties. That's important when you generate it for a sample. And once you pass it and get the schema, in the next step, you can use that values in the next step to in the dynamic list. That's the way of using burst JSON, and this is in developer way without messing around with the expression. But the problem is the fields, all these column names are showing in the logical name because we're just parsing the JSON which comes with the column name. So it's not really as nice as how the flow designer shows with the column display name. And another thing is if you're querying the same column from a multiple table, let's say if you're retrieving the created on from your contact as well as the created on of the related company, related account, it just shows two created on, and it can be quite confusing. And if you select the wrong one, it may have a wrong desire. It may be an incorrect column, and then it's not. It shows the one that you are not desire. And if you don't want to use the burst JSON, and if you are really good with writing the expressions, I totally recommend to do the write a burst write an expression. So it's quite simple, quite easy. I also quite struggle in the beginning. I don't know how to write. So it is just the the relationship and the lookup name, and after that, so it's a lookup, and if it is a polymorphic, that will be the table name, and after that, it will be followed by the column from the related table. So what you can do is you can just um, go to the dynamic values, select one of the columns, for example, full name from the column, and you click on the big quotes, and you will get this one. So this is the first line. Okay, this is the expression that you select from the dynamic value list. And after that, you go and replace this column name with that lookup name slash the related column name. And then you just paste it and use it as an expression. And this way you can use the expand. You can use the column from the expand query without using the burst JSON. And it is also, if you don't want to use the easier way than big code, is what I do is I just put it there, put my cursor inside that box, and Control A to select all. It will show the blues selection, and then I press Control C. Sometimes it just copy on the first try. Sometimes you have to press like Control C multiple times, and it just when you paste it into the notepad, you get something like this. and just remove the leading at sign and the opening curly bracket and the closing curly bracket. If you remove those, you will get the exact same expression like this, and then you can just replace with this lookup name slash related column name. So this is just for one level, but let's say if you want to have a multiple level, how you can put it in the expression. For example, I just want to get the email of the primary contact of the, the comedy of the contact, and in that case, you can get the expand query nested one using the fetch XML, no biggie. And the only part is the how you write the expression. So just the first two are just the one from the previous screen. The third one is what you have to focus. This is the same. It starts with the first lookup column, and this is the lookup column of the second column to column third second table to third table. So let's say it's the primary contact, and it's the primary contact ID, and the actual column name at the end of this one. So in that way, if you can do the nested expand for up to 7 or 8 in your expand query by just putting a slash lookup to another table slash lookup to another table, so you can write it in the one expand query. So for really complex queries, I recommend to use the fetch XML query. That will be helpful. It's some of those are really, some of the queries are not achievable in the OData query, especially joining to the parent and child in different ways. So it's easier to use the fetch XML sometimes. You can build get a fetch XML by advanced find and download the fetch XML, or use the view fetch XML tool if you have installed, or you can just simply get the query from the fetch XML builder. I've never come across this scenario where you have to use the fetch XML and the other parameters, but just in case if you're wondering, okay, then what happens if I populate these parameters as well as the fetch XML query? What will happen? So I just got curious and just try to query. And for a select query, it combines. What it means is if you specify first name in the select columns, and if you specify the last name in your fetch XML, it will query both columns. But the filter query, it will filter further. So if you have the specify the contact last name starts with the last two, and the contact full name starts with the first, then both filters will apply in your query. The order query will override. So if you have um, the order to sort by is the first name by the signing, then this order in this fetch XML will be ignored. So it will not sort by the last name anymore. And the expand query, this is quite interesting. The expand query that we specify over here will also be included in the query, but it will be expand in the alias instead of the nested array JSON value, just like the normal list rows action. And the top count will also override. So if we're specified 10, it will just retrieve 10 rows, no matter how much what's the number you specify in the fetch XML. So when we retrieve the data from the list row, sometimes we need to retrieve the name of the lookups or a name of the choices columns. And if you normally previously we only have that it will only return the GUID value of the lookup, so you have to call another call to get a row and get a name, or you have to use the expand query to get the name in the one query. But Microsoft has added the annotation for auditor community.display v1 formatted value. This is not available in the drop-down list of the dynamic value, so you will have to think a little bit with the expression. You might have to pick up your skills of writing expression. So it's not that hard. You just select the column, let's say the status. You just put that in your um, the action that you want to use. Then you either use the P code or just select all and copy it into the clipboard. You will get something like this, right? So after that, you just add auditor.community.display.v1.formatted value at the end of the column that you want to show the display name, and it will show the display name of the choices, lookups, yes, no column, and even the money value. It will just show with the money symbol and show the proper format as per the user who runs the flow. So it's really useful to get the formatted value without having additional calls. Okay, so here's comes the answer for the questions in the Pippin. So if we want to, by default, the list roles action can retrieve up to 5,000 roles. So how do we do? We can change the settings, and we can change the pagination, and we can change the up threshold up to 100,000 rows. 100,000 rows seems fine, but behind the scene, what Microsoft does is it goes and retrieves the first 5,000, and it goes and retrieves the subsequent pages. So by specifying that, that doesn't mean this is not one single API call. If you specify the 10,000 and retrieve 10,000, that means actually it is counted as the 2 API call if you retrieve the 10,000 rows. And the disadvantage of using this is the data, the current, based on the current capability. Microsoft is trying to fix that, but currently the data from the 5001, the subsequent pages, does not contain the annotation properties. For example, the formatted values that I explained just now. So if you are trying to retrieve the status active, inactive in the text, and if you want to process, write it somewhere, you will get that text value, formatted value for the first 5,000 records, but after that, that value will be empty. So you might want to use the next link property or pagination to get those, to loop it manually if your requirement is to retrieve those data. And another thing is, if you're using this threshold, the next link property does not come. It will be emptied. So that means you cannot use this to feature to fetch another 100,000 rows. So you can only retrieve 100,000 rows. By doing so, you cannot retrieve more than 100,000 rows with this um, with this settings, pagination settings. So in order to retrieve more than 100,000 rows, or in order to retrieve the formatted values for all of the data that you're retrieving after 5,000, you can manually loop through. One of the methods is to use the skip token. Um, so I have explained it in this my blog post for all these methods with the sample codes. It's not codes, but more like this expression of how you burst the next link parameter from the output of the list rows. So basically, you just retrieve for a very initial first time, and you try to get the next link value from the output. So if it is the empty, just put it as an empty string. Otherwise, we just use decode URI component to split the value after this skip token in the OData next link property. So it seems a little bit complicated, but if you look at the output of the flow, you will understand what I was trying to achieve. But basically, what it does is when the data from the when the data coming back from this list rows action, if there's a next page, there's always the OData next link property, and we're just trying to achieve get the skip token from that next link. So what we do is after initial query and initializing the next link, we will do the loop, do until loop until the skip token is empty. So this, as long as the skip token has a value, it will just loop through. And one thing to take note is the do until loop, by default, it runs only for 60 loops. So you can increase the limit by changing the number of dot over here. And in the list rows actions within the loop, you just have to specify the skip token. So this is the skip token that you initialize in the step initialize various step above. And what it does is after that, you just if there's another next rows in the next page, let's say you have 12,000 rows. Okay, so then we'll retrieve the first 5,000 and retrieve the second 5,000 in this one, and it will say, okay, there's still another batch next page. Then it will contain the same next link value, and it will just you will have to another step to specify and set the skip token variable in the using the next link, and there will be your logic. You just either want to process these rows or you write the data to somewhere else. So if there's a skip token, it will set it over here, and then it just loop through all over again. If there's no skip token, it will be empty, and when it's checked for checking next time, it's empty, so it will just get out of this loop. So that is how you loop through the OData queries with a skip token. And also, you can also do a simple pagination with the fetch XML. If your fetch XML query is the really simple ones, you can use what you can do is you just initialize a page number variable, let's say 1, and in the your fetch XML token, you just specify the page number variable, and if there's a page, if there's any data coming from this list rows action, you just keep incrementing the page number by 1 if there is no data coming from, let's say you have 12,000 rows, so you retrieve for 3 times, there's a there's still a value, and when the 4th time it retrieves, there's no data is coming out of it, will become false for this condition, and it will go to this one, and you just set the page number to 0, and it will just, the flow will just get out of the do until loop when the page number is equal to 0. So that's more simpler if you're using fetch XML. But there's also another method, or you can specify the paging cookie by setting the paging cookie property in the fetch XML, but that will be really complicated to try to explain it in the presentation. So you can find out more in the my blog post. It is not really improving the performance significantly, but if you're processing like millions of records, probably that's something that you might want to look into. These are just the bonus tips that I just want to try explain. So when you do the record count, you can use this length property and select the values from the dynamic property. So in that way, you can check whether what is the number of rows returning from the list records. And sometimes you know that you will only retrieving 1 row. There will be 1 row in the system, but you don't have the GUID, you have the other value. Let's say I want to send the email from this mailbox, the mailbox at test.com, and but there will be only 1 queue from there. And if you just don't directly use the select from the dynamic value, it will automatically put it into the apply to each block, because this is part of the array when the list rows action contain what it comes with the array. So what you can do is you can have just use the first function, and then you select the same thing, just like just now. You just select the values, the list of items from the output of the action that you're retrieving. And towards the end, after the close bracket of the first function, just put a question mark. So question mark is just to make sure that if it's not the case for this sample, because there will always be a QID, but let's say if you're retrieving one of the columns which may or may not be empty, and if there's not an if the value is empty, if you don't have a question mark, it will throw a null exception error. So it's always good to have a question mark, and then the square brackets and the logical name of the column that you're retrieving. And another bonus tip is to always try to use the experimental feature in the Power Automates, because this is how the normal dynamic content and the expression builder looks like. It's just one liner, and it's really hard to type a really complex expression. Yeah, so this is the new expression builder. So you can have a more complex expression in the really good indent, and it's more readable, and even the dynamic values are showing in the underneath, so it's easier to filter and select in one page instead of going multiple tabs as in the previous dialog. And you can also expand and collapse the sections that you want. No? So it's a really good. So to enable this new expression builder, you can go to the settings, automate settings, and you can enable the experimental features. But the thing is, it only works in the flow.microsoft.com. So now with the new maker experience, when you open the Cloudflare in the make.powerapps.com, it will just open the inline editor within the make.powerapps.com without showing the um, opening it in the new tab like this, like how it was doing previously. So if you want to use this experimental features, make sure you go to this your region.flow.microsoft.com. That's how you get this. Okay. Yeah, as I mentioned just now, just you can download the slide from this link below. Thank you all for the organizers for this from this Spark community organizing team, and thank you for all the sponsors. So yeah, if you have any questions, you can ask in the chat window. I will also go through if there's any question that I miss out.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, so let's have a look for questions. Whilst we're waiting for questions, Lynn, are you able to share your blog in the chat just so that people have a good reference to it? That'd be really helpful.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Okay. So whilst we wait for questions, oh, here we are. So Carsten's saying, wow, that was a mouthful of information around the Dataverse connector for a Saturday breakfast. I see a lot of potential around AI kicking it earlier to help citizen developers to prevent caveats. Hiya, Joe. Yeah, we got Joe online today. Fantastic. Joe joining us from Ireland, saying thanks, Lynn. Okay, Lynn, so thanks for sharing your blog there. So yeah, so for those who are not aware, what Lynn's actually done here is he's shown all the nuances when it comes to trying to perform queries and updates within the Dataverse using the Power Automate connector. So that is a deep learning curve, and he shared all those tips in 1 hour. Normally, it would take a lot longer for you to learn and discover the constraints and the limitations and the little things you need to do to make it work. So that's why this session is so important for anyone looking to use the Dataverse connector with Power Automate for development, for Power Automate. Because Lynn, you would agree, there's been a huge shift in the way we develop Dynamics and Power Apps and Dataverse over the past couple of years. Has shifted from the plugin development, synchronous and asynchronous development, all the way over to Power Automate, right? So I've got
Yeah.
a quick question for you, Lynn. From your experience, from kind of like a project perspective, how much has Power Automate replaced traditional plugins, for example? From a kind of a ratio perspective, what have you noticed?
Yeah. So for me, in the last 2 years since I started building Cloudflares, I have only built only one new plugin since then. Like the other times, I just maintain and update the existing plugin and bug fix a little bit, but like 95% of the logics were replaced, of the plugins were replaced with the Cloudflows, and the only plugin that I built is just the retrieve and retrieve multiple filter. So that has, yeah, changed significant comparing to the last 5 years ago.
Wow, that's huge. I mean, the implementations that I've been working on have hundreds of plugins, right? And yeah, we have a task to replace all of them now with Power Automate. So this is fantastic. Carsten has a question here. What would be your recommendation in terms of comparing using Power Automate versus using Web API calls with plugins to receive a goal?
Yes, my recommendation is to always use the Power Automate Cloudflares. In that way, it's not only the whole responsibility is not relying on the developers. So as in our team, we have the functional consultant, and as a technical consultant, we're both working. And sometimes I'm just busy building PCF and some stuff, and if there's any issue, the functional consultant will look into the flow and see what's wrong. While if this plugin is solely the responsibility for the developers. So most of the time, I totally recommend the cloud flows, with the exception of the where you want to implement the cloud plugin is where you want to um, have a really robust um, functionality that you really cannot miss, and also there's the Power Automate cloud flows are subject to um, the the 5 minutes the limitation. So you can only call the certain number of API calls within the cloud flows within the 5 minutes, and that is not impacted for the um, workflows and the plugin. So if there's a really frequent actions, then there may be a place for a plugin.
Okay, so we have a one final question. Oh, we got two questions. Two final questions. One question by Abdul is asking, could flows be used for data migration?
Indeed, yeah. Even in my previous projects, I use this cloud flows to read from the Excel and put it into the um, do the data migration. It's not ideal for a really big a lot of data, but it is, if you have a few thousands of data, you can use it to do the data migration.
And that's an important point that Lynn just mentioned. There are constraints with the amount of data you're migrating. So please consider that as part of the Power Automate restrictions. There is one question. How can pre-validation and pre-operation plugins be replaced by Flow?
Well, pre-validation and pre-operation plugins then not be replaced by the flow. So for that scenario, you will still have to use the plugins to achieve that functionality.
And finally, last question. Oh, actually, it's a comment by Eduardo saying, in my honest opinion, comparing Power Automate to build small custom actions seems to be easier to maintain, but more difficult to troubleshoot. What's your opinion on that, Lynn?
That depends on how who we are talking to. Like if you're um, like the developer, yeah, it might not be as easy to troubleshoot and go through the code, just like how we go through the plugins. But if you have this functional consultants, and they can simply go to the specific flow run in the flow run history, and if they can see through the steps, so for them it will be easier to troubleshoot.
Yeah, so I think the main thing is accessibility because with a plugin, it's a black box which only a
Mhm.
developer would need to debug, whereas with functional, anyone can now go in and debug your flows and your processes. So yeah, that's a really big win there. Fantastic. So lots of great feedback from your session again. I really enjoyed it as well, and all the attendees did. Yep. Okay. Well, anyway, guys, we're at the end of the session. It's been a huge privilege to have you here today, all the way from New Zealand, Lynn. So, really big round of applause, everyone, for Lynn for that fantastic, very important session on Power Automate connector for Dataverse. Fantastic. Thank you, Lynn.
Okay, thank you, Russ.